Hannah Whitaker slammed both suitcases onto the porch of a stranger's house, turned around, and told the bus driver to go on without her. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her back teeth. She wasn't brave. She wasn't certain. She was 42 years old, 300 miles from anything familiar, and she had just agreed to marry a man she had never once met, a man with 6 sons who had already buried one woman they loved. She told herself she wasn't afraid. She was lying. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and drop the name of your city in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. Every single comment means the world to me. Now stay with me, because what happens inside that ranch house in the next 2 hours will absolutely break you open. The letter had taken 11 days to reach her. Hannah had read it so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds, the ink smearing slightly where her thumb always landed right at the line that said, "Honest work, honest home, 6 boys who need a steady hand." She hadn't answered it right away. She'd set it on the kitchen table of her rented room in Abilene, and walked away from it 3 separate times over 2 days, telling herself it was foolish. Telling herself a woman her age didn't go answering advertisements in the back of newspapers like some desperate girl with no better options. But the truth was uglier and simpler than pride. She was running out of time. Her landlady had already mentioned twice very politely, which somehow made it worse, that the room would be needed by September. The diner where Hannah worked 4 mornings a week had cut her shifts down to 2 after the owner's daughter came back from college needing the income. And Hannah's savings, the small, careful pile she had built over 6 years of keeping herself alive after her first marriage dissolved into nothing, had finally reached a number that frightened her. Not desperate, she told herself. Practical. There was a difference. She wrote back to the advertisement. Cole Walker, the letter said his name was. Walker Ranch, outside a town called Millhaven, southeast Texas. She wrote carefully 3 drafts before the final one, honest about her age. Honest about the fact that she was not a small woman, and never had been honest that she had no children of her own and no experience running a cattle operation. She told him she could cook, keep accounts, manage a household, and work hard without complaint. She told him she was not looking for romance. She was looking for a place to be useful. He wrote back in 4 days. His letter was shorter than hers and rougher in its language, the handwriting of a man who wrote infrequently and knew it. He said he appreciated her honesty. He said the ranch needed someone who could be honest more than it needed someone pretty. He said the boys were difficult but not bad. He said he would meet her bus on Saturday the 14th if she decided to come. He did not say please. He did not say he hoped she would. But at the very bottom, in letters slightly smaller than the rest, as though he had added it after putting down the pen and picking it back up, he wrote, "The youngest one is 8. His name is Sam. He has a hard time sleeping." Hannah had read that line 7 times. Then she booked the bus ticket. The ride from Abilene to Millhaven was 4.5 hours through flat, sun-bleached country that shimmered at the edges in the July heat. Hannah sat in the second row behind the driver and watched Texas roll past the window and thought about every decision that had led her to this seat on this bus, going toward this particular unknown. She was not a woman given to self-pity. She had made a deliberate practice of refusing it, but she allowed herself in the privacy of her own mind on that long bus ride to feel the full weight of what she was doing. She was 42 years old. She was going to marry a stranger. She was going to become a stepmother to 6 boys she had never met. She pressed her hand flat against the bus window and watched her own reflection stare back at her from the glass, and she said very quietly, not quite aloud, "You can do this. You have done harder things." She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she said it anyway. Cole Walker was standing at the edge of the gravel lot outside the Millhaven bus station when the bus pulled in, and Hannah recognized him before he recognized her. Recognized him because he was the only man standing still in a lot full of people moving. He was tall, weathered, in the way that outdoor men get weathered, with forearms that showed years of labor and a jaw that hadn't decided yet whether it was braced for a fight or just accustomed to holding tension. He was holding his hat in both hands in front of him, turning it slowly by the brim, which Hannah would later understand was the closest Cole Walker ever came to showing nervousness. He spotted her when she stepped off the bus with her 2 suitcases. She watched him take her in, all of her the full weight and shape and age of her, and she held her chin level and her spine straight, and let him look because she had written him an honest letter, and she was not going to start apologizing now for being exactly what she had said she was. He walked toward her. "Hannah Whitaker." "That's me." He reached out and took the heavier suitcase from her hand without asking. "Cole Walker," he said. "Truck's over here." That was the entirety of their first conversation. She followed him to the truck. The drive to the ranch was 20 minutes, and they spent most of it in silence, which Hannah found neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, more like 2 people trying to take the measure of a room before deciding how to stand in it. Cole kept his eyes on the road. Hannah kept hers on the land coming up through the windshield, the flat reach of it, the way the sky sat huge and low over everything. "How long since your wife passed?" she asked, because she was not a woman who found silence more comfortable than difficult questions. His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. 3 years this October. "And the boys have been without a woman in the house since then." "Since before that," he said, and something in his voice closed like a door gently but completely, and Hannah understood without pressing it that there was a longer and more complicated story there that she was not going to hear today. "All right," she said. She looked back out the window. "The boys know I'm coming?" she asked. A beat of silence. "They know." "Do they want me to come?" Another beat. Longer. "No," Cole said. And then, as though he owed her more than a single word, "Most of 'em know. Luke especially. He's 16. He's been the one holding things together since for a while now. He don't see why a stranger should come in and change things." "And what about you?" Hannah said. "Do you want me here?" Cole was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said without looking at her, "I want my boys to have a chance at something better than what we've been doing, whatever that takes." It wasn't yes, but it was honest. She respected honest. The ranch came into view around a bend in the road, a wide, low-slung house with a long porch outbuildings scattered behind it, fencing that needed work, a yard that had been allowed to become whatever it wanted to be. Hannah took it all in without comment. Cole pulled the truck up to the house, and they got out, and that was when she met them. They were assembled on the porch in a rough line, not formally, not as though anyone had organized them, but arranged by some gravitational force that put the older ones at the edges and the younger ones in the middle. 6 boys. The oldest was tall and watchful, arms crossed. The youngest, Sam, 8 years old. The one who had a hard time sleeping, stood at the far end of the line with his sneakers pointed inward and his eyes on the ground. None of them spoke. Hannah stopped at the base of the porch steps and looked up at them all 6, and they looked down at her, and for a moment, nobody moved at all. Then she said, "Which one of you is Sam?" The smallest boy's head came up. "Me," he said, barely audible. "I'm Hannah," she said. "I heard you're the one who makes sure everybody gets to bed okay at night." Sam blinked. "Nobody told me that." "I'm telling you now," Hannah said. "Important job." Sam looked uncertain but not closed. That was something. She looked along the line of them, then one to the next, not hurrying it. Dark eyes, light eyes, their father's jaw on most of them. Various stages of wariness and resentment and flat curiosity. The one at the far left, broad-shouldered jaw set, hard, watching her the way you watch something you've already decided you don't trust. That would be Luke. She didn't need to be told. She didn't say anything to him specifically. She just noted him and moved on. "I'm going to need somebody to show me where things are in the kitchen," she said to all of them collectively. "I was on a bus for almost 5 hours, and I haven't eaten since this morning. I imagine some of you haven't eaten either." There was a shuffling silence. Then a boy of about 12, she would learn his name was Danny, said, "There's not much in there." "There's always something," Hannah said. She picked up her suitcase and climbed the porch steps, and the line of boys parted to let her through, and she went inside. The kitchen was worse than not much. It was the kitchen of a household that had been surviving not living canned goods shoved into a cabinet without order. A cast iron skillet with old grease hardened in the bottom, sitting on the back of the stove. The kind of accumulated neglect that comes not from laziness, but from exhaustion and grief, and nobody knowing quite whose job it had become to care. She stood in the middle of it and looked at it for a moment. Then she opened the cabinet. Pinto beans, 2 cans of tomatoes, a partial bag of cornmeal, some dried onion, a half-used jar of bacon grease on the back shelf that she opened and smelled and decided was still good. Behind her she heard someone come in. She didn't turn around. "You can make something out of that," said a voice, young male, unconvinced. "I can make supper out of that," Hannah said. She pulled the cornmeal forward. "Get me a bowl from whichever cabinet has the bowls." A pause. Then the sound of a cabinet opening, a bowl being set on the counter beside her. She turned and looked. It was Danny, the 12-year-old, watching her with an expression that was trying hard to be skeptical, but was losing the battle to plain hunger. "You know how to make cornbread?" he asked. "I know how to make cornbread that'll make you want to sit down before it's out of the pan," Hannah said. "Wash your hands and help me, or go sit down. Either way's fine." Danny washed his hands. That was the beginning of the first small thing. She made skillet cornbread and a pot of pinto beans with dried onion and the bacon grease. And it was simple food. Nothing remarkable, but she made it right. The cornbread golden and crisp at the edges. The beans long simmered, even though she'd only had 40 minutes seasoned carefully with what little she had. She found a chipped pitcher and filled it with water from the tap. She found mismatched plates in the cabinet above the sink and set them on the table without worrying about whether they matched. "Who else is in the house?" she called toward the doorway. "Everybody," Danny said from where he was watching the cornbread. "Except Luke." Luke went out to the barn. "Go tell him supper's ready," Hannah said. Danny looked uncertain. "He might not come." "Tell him anyway." Danny went. She heard the screen door bang behind him. She did not know if Luke would come to the table. She did not know if most of them would. She set 7 places regardless, put the food in the middle, and stood at the kitchen counter and waited. They came. Not all at once, and not without the particular reluctance of people who hadn't sat at the same table in a long time and weren't sure how to do it anymore. But they came, the older boys drifting in 1 or 2 at a time, the younger ones following Sam, last of all climbing into a chair at the end and sitting with his hands folded in his lap, like he'd been told to wait. Luke came in last. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, taking in the table. The food, the assembled brothers, Hannah standing at the counter, and his expression was something she couldn't quite read. Not exactly anger, not exactly grief, more like a person who has braced for impact for so long, they no longer know what to do when the impact takes a different shape than expected. He sat down. He didn't say anything. Hannah sat too, at the end across from Cole, and she looked at the faces around that table. 7 people who were not yet a family and might never be. 7 people eating beans and cornbread off mismatched plates in a kitchen that smelled like years of going without. And she felt something settle in her chest that was not happiness and was not certainty, but was something close to resolution. She had made a promise to herself on that bus. Not a grand promise, not a dramatic one, just a quiet, private, unspoken one that she would keep or she would leave, but she would not stay and fail to try. Cole cleared his throat. "Boys," he said with the particular awkward formality of a man unaccustomed to making announcements. "This is Hannah. She'll be staying on." Silence around the table. Then Sam said, without looking up from his plate, "She said I was important." Nobody quite knew what to do with that. Danny said, "The cornbread's real good." Luke said nothing, but he ate. And that night, when Hannah had washed the dishes alone because she hadn't asked for help and wasn't going to demand it on the first night, and the house had gone quiet, and she was sitting on the edge of the narrow bed in the small room Cole had prepared for her, with its one window looking out toward the barn. That night she heard something in the hallway outside her door. Soft footsteps. A pause. Then nothing. She sat very still. After a moment, she got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty, but there was a flashlight on the floor just outside her door. Small yellow plastic, the kind a child would keep. She picked it up. She looked down the hallway toward the closed door at the far end that she had been told was Sam's room. She understood. She went back into her room and left her own door open 3 inches. In the morning, the flashlight was gone. But Sam was the first one at the breakfast table, sitting in the same chair, hands folded again, waiting. Hannah set a plate in front of him without comment. "You like eggs?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Sam said. She cracked 4 eggs into the pan. That was the second small thing, and somewhere between the first and the second small thing, without her planning it or naming it something in that broken, dusty, grief-worn house, had shifted not much. Not enough to see yet, barely enough to feel. But it had shifted. And Hannah Whitaker, who was not brave, and not glamorous, and not young, and not the woman anyone had imagined or wanted or sent for cracked eggs into a hot pan on a summer morning in a stranger's kitchen, and told herself, this is how it starts. One day, one meal, one small thing at a time. The days that followed were not gentle. Hannah had not expected them to be. She had understood from the moment she stepped into that kitchen, the grease-hardened skillet, the bare cabinets, the silence that sat over the house like something with weight, that this was not a place in the middle of healing. This was a place that had stopped trying. The difference mattered. She woke every morning before 5, not because anyone asked her to, not because Cole expected it, but because the house needed someone to decide that the day was worth starting. And in the absence of anyone else willing to make that decision, she made it herself. She started the coffee first always because she had learned in the first 3 days that the smell of coffee was the only thing that moved the older boys out of their rooms before 6:30 without an argument. Then eggs. Then whatever she could assemble from what remained in the pantry, which was most mornings, not much. But Hannah was a woman who had spent years learning how to make not much into enough. And she applied that skill without complaint, and without drawing attention to the fact that she was applying it. Cole noticed. He didn't say so directly. He was not a man built for direct acknowledgement. But he started appearing in the kitchen doorway in the mornings, while she cooked coffee cup in hand, leaning against the frame in a way that was trying to look casual, and wasn't entirely succeeding. The third morning, she handed him a plate without turning around. He took it. He sat at the table. He ate. That was their agreement. Unspoken, settled without negotiation. She would feed them, and they would show up to be fed, and somewhere in the repetition of that simple exchange, something might eventually grow. The boys were harder. Not all of them, not equally. Danny had decided within 48 hours that Hannah was acceptable, which he communicated by following her from room to room, asking questions about cooking, about where she was from, about whether she had ever seen a rattlesnake, about whether she thought the Dallas Cowboys were going to have a decent season. Hannah answered every question as though it deserved a real answer, because it did, because Danny was 12 years old, and questions were how 12-year-olds decided whether to trust you, and she understood that. The younger 3, Sam and the 2 middle boys she was still sorting out, 9-year-old Eli and 11-year-old Marcus, circled her at a cautious distance that grew slightly smaller each day. Sam had stopped leaving the flashlight outside her door after the first week, but he had started appearing at her elbow at odd moments, not speaking, just present the way a child hovers near something they want to believe is safe, but aren't certain of yet. Eli asked her one afternoon if she knew how to fix a bike chain, and when she said she reckoned she could figure it out, he brought the bike to the back porch and watched her work on it with the focused intensity of a boy conducting an important experiment. Marcus was quieter than the others, a boy who expressed himself mostly in drawings that he left on the kitchen table sometimes, and then disappeared before she could comment on them, and Hannah made a point of leaving a brief note beside each one. Good one. Or, I like the horse small enough that it couldn't be called a big deal, significant enough that Marcus kept leaving them. The oldest 18-year-old Caleb and 23-year-old Wade were polite in the formal, careful way of young men who have learned that politeness is the safest distance between themselves and a situation they don't know how to categorize. Wade worked the ranch alongside Cole from sunup to sundown, and came to dinner tired and ate and left again, not unfriendly, but not open either. Caleb was the one who watched her the most carefully, who asked Cole questions about the ranch finances within earshot of Hannah without quite looking at her, who was trying, she understood, to figure out what her presence meant for the future of something he considered his responsibility. She let him watch. She didn't try to reassure him. She had learned a long time ago that reassurance from a stranger meant nothing. It was time that counted in action and the slow accumulation of days. And then there was Luke. Luke was the one who kept her up some nights, lying in that narrow bed, listening to the house settle, turning over in her mind what she had seen and what she hadn't been able to reach. He did his chores. He came to dinner. He was never rude. Not technically, he didn't slam doors in her face or refuse to pass the salt when she asked for it. But there was a quality to his silence that was different from the others' silences. Where theirs was cautious, his was deliberate. He was not waiting to decide about her. He had already decided, and every careful, correct, uninflected response he gave her was a way of communicating that decision without having to say it outright. One evening in the second week, she was going over the ranch's account ledger at the kitchen table. After dinner, Cole had given it to her without much explanation, just set it in front of her, and said she was welcome to look at it, if she wanted to get a sense of things, and she had looked at it, and then spent 3 hours trying to figure out if the numbers were as bad as they appeared to be, which they were when Luke came into the kitchen for a glass of water. He filled the glass at the tap. He turned around and saw her at the table with the ledger. He went very still. "That's the ranch accounts," he said. "Yes," Hannah said. "He gave you that." "He did." Luke set his glass down on the counter with a careful click. "Why?" Hannah looked up at him. "Because I asked to see it." "Why'd you ask to see it?" "Because," she said, "if I'm going to help fix something, I need to know how broken it is." Something moved across Luke's face there, and gone fast the way emotions move across the faces of people who have learned to keep them brief. "It's not your ranch to fix," he said. "Not yet," Hannah agreed. "But your daddy asked me here, and I said I'd come, and I keep my word. So, I'm going to understand the situation and see what I can do, and if you have a better suggestion for how to handle a cattle operation that's 8 months behind on its equipment loan and running 40 head shy of what it needs to be breaking even, I'm genuinely listening." She said it without heat, without challenge in her voice, just the plain statement of a plain fact. Luke stared at her. Then he picked up his glass and walked out. But in the morning, when she came downstairs before 5, there was a piece of paper on the kitchen table, a list in handwriting she didn't recognize of 3 suppliers in town who Cole used to have accounts with before the accounts went unpaid and the relationships went cold. Next to each name, a note about who to talk to and what the specific situation was. She didn't know for certain it was Luke, but she had a strong feeling. She folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket and didn't mention it to anyone. That was the third small thing. And small things she was learning were the only currency this family understood. The financial situation was worse than even the ledger had shown her at first read. Hannah spent the better part of a week going through every paper she could find. Invoices, receipts, old bills, tax documents stuffed into a drawer in the office off the hallway. And what she assembled was a picture of a man who had been keeping a ranch alive through sheer stubbornness and an increasingly creative relationship, with which creditors he paid and when. Cole was not a dishonest man. He was a man who had been overwhelmed by grief and by the complexity of single-fathering 6 boys while trying to hold together a cattle operation, and who had quietly begun to drown in the space between those 2 impossible demands without telling anyone. She sat him down on a Sunday afternoon when the boys were occupied and laid it out for him. "You've got 8 months before the bank's patience runs out on the equipment loan," she said. "The Hendersons over on Route 9 will buy your excess hay at a fair price if you can get it cut and baled before the end of August. That's workable if we start this week. The vegetable garden behind the south fence hasn't been used in how long?" Cole rubbed the back of his neck. "Clara's garden. 2 years. Maybe 3. Hannah had not yet heard him say his wife's name. She registered it without remarking on it. "It's got good soil," she said. "I walked it this morning. If I plant now, I can get a summer crop that'll cut the grocery bill by half at minimum. That's not nothing." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You know about farming. I know about keeping people fed when money's short," Hannah said. "That covers a lot of the same ground." He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "What else?" he said. "Pies," Hannah said. Cole looked at her. "There's a farmer's market in Mill Haven on Saturday mornings," she said. "I've seen it. I can bake 10-12 pies a week and sell them. That's supplemental income that doesn't depend on cattle prices." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he said with the particular difficulty of a proud man, acknowledging that he needs something, "Hannah, I can't ask you to do all that." "You're not asking," she said. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do." He looked at her across the table. This woman who had shown up in his kitchen 2 weeks ago with 2 suitcases and a face that didn't apologize for itself, who had fed his sons and kept his accounts and walked his dead wife's garden at 5 in the morning without anyone telling her to. And Hannah watched him try to find the words for something he wasn't sure he was allowed to feel. He didn't find them, but he nodded. That was enough. The Saturday market was where it got complicated. Hannah had loaded the truck bed with 8 pies, 4 peach, 2 blueberry, 2 buttermilk, and driven herself into Mill Haven at 7 in the morning to set up a card table at the edge of the market. She had made a simple sign on cardboard with a marker. She had priced the pies at $4 each, which she had calculated was competitive with the one other baked goods seller and still left her a workable margin. What she had not calculated was Mill Haven. Small towns, she knew, had opinions. Small towns formed those opinions fast and held them long and expressed them in the particular language of looks and silences and conversations that stopped when you walked within earshot. She had understood when Cole drove her to the feed store her first week, and the man behind the counter spoke to Cole, and not to her, even when she was the one asking the question that Mill Haven had already made up its mind about the woman from Abilene who had answered the widower Walker's advertisement. She was an outsider. She was overweight. She was past the age that people in Mill Haven apparently considered relevant. These were not going to change, and Hannah had not come to Texas to fight a town's opinion of her. But standing behind her card table at the Mill Haven Farmers Market on a Saturday morning, she felt the weight of it more acutely than she had inside the ranch house, where at least the audience was limited to 7 people she was already in the process of managing. Here people looked at her, and looked at her sign, and looked at her pies, and sometimes looked at all 3 and kept walking. A woman she didn't know stopped in front of the table, picked up one of the peach pies, turned it over like she was checking it for defects, and set it back down without buying it or speaking. Hannah smiled pleasantly and said nothing. Another woman, older, silver-haired. The kind of Texan woman who wore her confidence like a second skin. Stopped and said not unkindly, but not gently either, "You're the one who answered Cole Walker's ad." "I am," Hannah said. The woman said. She looked at the pies. "Those real peaches." "Picked them myself off the tree behind the east fence," Hannah said. "Canned my own filling this week." The woman looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression just slightly, not warmth exactly, but reassessment. "I'll take 2, she said. She paid and walked away without another word. By 10 o'clock, Hannah had sold 6 of the 8 pies. By 10:30, she had sold them all and taken 2 orders for the following Saturday. She drove back to the ranch with $32 in her apron pocket and a head full of plans for next week. And when she got back, Danny was sitting on the porch steps and saw her face and said, "You sold them all." "All of them," Hannah said. "I told Marcus they'd sell," Danny said with the satisfaction of a boy who had been right. "He said nobody was going to buy pies from a stranger." Hannah climbed the porch steps. "People will always buy a good pie," she said. "That's the one reliable thing I know about human nature." She was almost through the door when she stopped. Luke was standing at the far end of the porch arms, crossed, leaning against the railing. He had clearly been there when she pulled up. He had clearly seen her get out of the truck. He had not moved or spoken. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Good," he said. Just that, one word. Good, she said. She went inside. It was not friendship. It was not acceptance. But it was the first word he had offered her that wasn't the careful, deliberate minimum of a boy committed to keeping his distance. And Hannah tucked it away in the same pocket where she kept the folded list of suppliers and the memory of Sam's flashlight on the floor, and Danny washing his hands without being told twice, and she added it to the small growing collection of things that told her she was still in the right place. 3 weeks in, Cole asked her quietly at the end of a long evening whether she was finding it manageable. He meant the house, the boys, the situation. She thought about Luke's one-word offering on the porch, about Sam appearing at her elbow, about the $32 and the 2 orders for next Saturday, and the ledger that was still frightening, but slightly less frightening than it had been a week ago. Yes, she said. Cole looked at the table. They're not easy. No, Hannah agreed. But they're not trying to be difficult either. They're just scared. Cole was quiet for a long time. So am I, he said. It was the most honest thing he had said to her since the truck ride from the bus station. Hannah looked at him, this worn, stubborn, grief-heavy man who had placed an advertisement in a newspaper because he was out of other options and was too proud to say so. And she felt something she had been carefully not feeling start to work its way loose from the place she'd kept it locked. She didn't name it. It was too early to name it. I know, she said, and that was all. And that. But the next morning when she came downstairs before 5, Cole was already in the kitchen. Not leaning in the doorway. Actually in the kitchen with the coffee already made, pouring 2 cups, and he handed her one when she walked in, and she took it, and they stood at the counter together in the early dark before the boys were up. Not talking, just present, just there. And that quiet moment in that worn-out kitchen with the coffee and the dark, and 7 people sleeping in rooms above them. And all the work still to be done was the closest thing to peace. Hannah Whitaker had felt in longer than she could clearly remember. She held the cup in both hands. She let herself have it, just for a minute. Then she set it down and started breakfast because the boys would be up soon and someone had to be ready. The storm had been threatening for 3 days. Hannah felt it in the way the air changed heavy electric, the kind of pressure that settled in your chest and made people short with each other for reasons they couldn't quite name. The boys were restless. Cole was distracted. Even Sam, who had taken to sitting beside Hannah at the kitchen table in the evenings, while she went over accounts, kept getting up and walking to the window and coming back without explanation. She didn't need the weather report to know something was coming. She needed it about the same way she needed someone to tell her the family was struggling. The signs were already everywhere. What she hadn't anticipated was that the storm would break 2 things at once, the fence line on the east pasture and something far older and far more fragile that had been cracking quietly inside the Walker family for 3 years. It started on a Tuesday evening, late July, when the temperature had been sitting at 102 for 4 straight days, and everyone's patience had been filed down to the bare wire underneath. Cole came in from the south field at 6 o'clock with the particular set to his jaw that Hannah had learned meant something had gone wrong that he hadn't figured out how to tell anyone yet, and he sat at the dinner table and ate without speaking, and then pushed back his chair and said to no one specifically, "Fence on the east line's got a section that won't hold another hard rain. Need to get it reinforced before Thursday." Wade said, "I can get out there tomorrow morning." Cole said, "I need you on the Henderson delivery." Caleb said, "I've got the equipment serviced, I can take the east line." Cole said, "Caleb, I need you on the Henderson delivery with Wade." A silence settled. Then Luke said from his end of the table, with the careful, neutral tone he used when he was saying something pointed without technically saying something pointed, "What about the cattle count? You said last week we were going to do the count before end of month." "I know what I said. We're already 3 weeks behind on it." "Luke," Cole's voice had a warning in it, "I'm just saying, I know what you're saying." The table went quiet. In the particular way, it went quiet when Cole and Luke entered the particular orbit they sometimes entered, where every word was also the ghost of a dozen other words that hadn't been said yet. Hannah watched them from her end of the table without moving. Eli and Marcus had both dropped their eyes to their plates. Sam had his hand wrapped around his fork, but had stopped eating. Danny was the only one still chewing, and even he had slowed down. "I'll take the east fence," Hannah said. Everyone looked at her. Cole said, "Hannah." "I've watched you do it twice," she said. "I know where the post driver is. Danny can come with me and handle the wire while I set the posts. We can have that section done by noon if we start at first light." Danny sat up straighter. Luke said, "That's not—" He stopped. Hannah looked at him. "Not what—" He pressed his jaw together. He didn't finish the sentence. Cole looked at Hannah for a long moment, and she could see him calculating the way he always calculated all the variables and the pride and the practical necessity, and then he said, "All right, first light." Luke pushed back from the table and left the room. Nobody said anything. Hannah started clearing the plates. She and Danny had the east fence section patched by 11 the next morning, which Danny declared loudly was a record, and he was probably right. Hannah had driven posts before, not often, but often enough, and Danny turned out to have a surprisingly steady hand with the wire stapler once she showed him the proper angle. They worked in the building heat without much conversation. The comfortable kind of silence that settles between two people who have found their rhythm in a shared task. And by the time they were loading the equipment back into the truck bed, Danny wiped his face with his sleeve and said, "You're pretty good at that." "So are you," Hannah said. "Luke taught me the wire part," Danny said without seeming to think about whether he should say it. "Last summer. He said if you can't fix your own fence, you don't deserve to run cattle." Hannah thought about that. "He's not wrong," she said. Danny climbed into the passenger seat. "He's not wrong about most things," he said. "He's just—" He paused, searching. "He's real hard to be around when he's hurting." Hannah started the truck. "I know," she said. "Do you think he'll ever—" Danny stopped again. "Give it time," Hannah said. Danny nodded like that was an answer, and maybe it was. The storm hit Thursday night, and it did not behave. Hannah woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of the wind changing pitch and sat up in bed, knowing before she was fully conscious that something was wrong. She was dressed and in the hallway in under 2 minutes, and Cole was already coming out of his room at the other end pulling on his boots. "East pasture," he said. "The new section," Hannah said. "No, north corner, the old section." They went downstairs fast, and the back door banged open in the wind, before Cole got his hand on it, and the rain came sideways, the kind of rain that made the dark feel solid. Cole yelled for Wade and Caleb, and they were already awake, already pulling on jackets. Luke appeared at the top of the stairs in the time it took Hannah to turn around. "How many head in this north pasture?" she called up to him. 32, he said immediately. He was already moving. Cole said, "Luke, stay with the younger boys." "I'm not staying," Luke said. He was past Hannah and out the door before Cole could argue. Hannah turned to find Danny right behind her. "Not you," she said. "I need you inside." "Hannah." "Danny." She looked at him straight. "Eli and Marcus are going to be scared. Sam is going to be terrified. I need someone in this house who they trust. That's you. Can you do that?" Danny stood in the doorway in the rain-blurred dark, 14 years old, and wanting badly to go, and she watched him make the decision. Watched him choose responsibility over adventure, and he said, "Yeah, okay." She squeezed his arm once and went. The next 3 hours were the hardest Hannah had spent since arriving at the Walker Ranch, and she had spent some hard ones. Working in driving rain in the dark of a Texas night to find 32 head of cattle across a pasture with a collapsed fence line was not something she had training for, and she did not pretend otherwise. She stayed with the truck, coordinating using the headlights to help as Cole and Wade and Caleb and Luke moved through the dark on horseback. She kept track of the count on a notepad she kept dry under her jacket, calling numbers between Cole and Wade on the two-way radio. Cole had tossed her before he mounted, and when a group of 8 came back through the gap in the fence line, she was there to direct them. Standing in the rain in the headlights, arms out, not thinking about how she looked, or how wet she was, or how her boots were completely destroyed. By 4:30 in the morning, they had 30 of the 32. by 5:15, they had 31 at 5:40. As the rain began to lighten and the sky turned the particular gray that came just before dawn, Luke came in from the east end of the field, leading the last animal, a young heifer that had gotten herself stuck in the low drainage ditch at the property's edge, and his horse was mud to the shoulder, and he was mud to the waist, and he was breathing hard, and he looked at Hannah standing by the truck with her notepad, and he said, voice rough, "That's 32. 32, she confirmed. He nodded. He dismounted. And then something shifted in his face. Something quick and terrible. The way feeling moves through a person who has been holding it back for a long time and has finally run out of the physical strength to keep holding, and he turned away from her and pressed one hand against the side of the truck and stood there with his back to her and his head down and his shoulders doing the thing shoulders do when a person is fighting with everything they have not to break apart in front of someone. Hannah stood very still. She did not move toward him. She did not speak. She gave him the only thing she had to give in that moment, which was the dignity of not being witnessed too directly. And she turned and made a note on her notepad that didn't need making and counted 30 seconds and then said to the field rather than to him, "Your dad's going to need that horse rubbed down before anything else." A pause. Then horse, "Yeah. You did good work tonight," she said, still to the field. Silence. Then, "So did you." She heard him take a breath, steady himself. And then she heard him lead the horse away toward the barn, and she let out a breath of her own slow and careful, and looked out at the gray dawn coming up over the Walker Ranch, and the 32 cattle in the north pasture that were accounted for and safe. It was not the moment everything changed, but it was the moment she understood that the change was possible. Cole found her by the truck 10 minutes later. He was mud-soaked, exhausted, and wearing the specific expression of a man who has been pushed past a certain point and has arrived somewhere on the other side of it that he doesn't have a name for yet. "You should go in," he said. "So should you. Hannah." He stopped. He looked at her. In the early gray light, with the rain down to a drizzle, and the whole long terrible night behind them, there was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not the careful management of a man keeping things functional, not the formal gratitude he offered when she solved a practical problem, but something rawer and less controlled. "What you did tonight, the radio, the count, staying out here, you didn't have to do any of that. I live here," she said simply. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Clara used to say that. I live here," like it answered everything. Hannah felt the weight of that land somewhere between her ribs. She didn't fill the space it made. She just let it be there. "She sounds like she was a smart woman," Hannah said. Cole's jaw worked. "She was," he said. "She was a real good woman." "I know," Hannah said. "Your boys tell me that every day, the ones who talk and the ones who don't." Cole looked at the ground between them. When he looked back up, his eyes were red at the edges, in a way he was not going to acknowledge, and that Hannah was not going to acknowledge either. "Thank you," he said, "for tonight." Hannah nodded once. She went inside, but the storm had cracked something open, and what came through the crack in the next 3 days was not what anyone expected. It started the morning after when Luke came to breakfast. That wasn't unusual. He always came to breakfast because Luke was nothing if not dutiful. What was unusual was that he sat down and looked at Hannah directly across the table, which he rarely did, and said, "The north corner post is going to need full replacement, not just reinforcement. We should do it before the next rain system." Hannah said, "I agree. I was thinking Saturday." "Wednesday's better," Luke said. "Rain's forecast again for the weekend." "Wednesday then," Hannah said. It was the first time they had agreed on anything, and they both knew it, and neither of them made anything of it which was exactly right. But Cole had heard it, and Hannah caught the brief flicker of something across his face, something relieved and fragile before he looked back at his coffee. That was the first crack. The second came from a direction she hadn't expected. Caleb found her in the office Thursday afternoon, where she was updating the accounts after confirming the Henderson payment had cleared. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, which was his thinking posture, rather than his defensive one. She had learned the difference, and he said, "I've been looking at some of those numbers." Hannah set down her pen. Which numbers? Itch. The overall picture. He came in and sat across from her. He was 23, the oldest, the one who carried the ranch's future in his head like a weight he'd picked up so long ago he'd stopped noticing it. If the hay sale to Henderson goes through and the market pies keep selling at the rate they're selling... He paused. It's not fixed, but it's different than it was 2 months ago. It is, Hannah said. Caleb looked at the ledger, then at her. You've done that. We've done it, Hannah said. I didn't bale that hay alone. Caleb was quiet. He had his father's jaw and his father's habit of holding things in his face until they were sorted, and she waited him out. I was going to leave, he said finally. Before you came, I had a job offer in Houston, management training for an oil company, good money. He stopped. I turned it down because I didn't think the ranch would survive if I went. Hannah looked at him steadily. Is the offer still open? Caleb blinked. I don't know. Find out, Hannah said. I can't leave now. Caleb. She leaned forward slightly. What your father needs from you is not for you to give up your life for this ranch. What he needs is for you to be someone who chose to be here. There's a difference. Find out if the offer's still open. Then make a real decision. Caleb stared at her. You've only been here 2 months, he said. I know, Hannah said. Is anything I said wrong? A long silence. No, he admitted. He got up and left. Hannah picked up her pen and went back to the ledger, and her hand was steadier than she expected it to be because something had just shifted again. Another small, irreversible thing, and she was beginning to understand that this was how families healed. Not in dramatic moments, not in grand revelations, but in these small, private, unremarkable conversations that changed one person's inner landscape at a time. The third crack was Luke, and it hit harder than the others. It was a Friday evening, 5 days after the storm, and Hannah was alone in the kitchen finishing the dinner dishes when she heard raised voices from the back of the house. Not the ordinary irritable brother kind of raised voices, the other kind, the kind with weight behind them. She turned off the tap and listened. Cole, Luke, the sound of a door hitting the wall. She walked to the hallway without hurrying. Luke was in the doorway of the office, and Cole was behind the desk, and the air between them had the quality of something that had been building for a very long time and had just found its way out. 3 years, Luke said. His voice was cracked at the edges, not with anger, but with something underneath anger. 3 years, and you never once. He stopped. Started again. You just shut down, after she died. You just went somewhere nobody could reach you, and I was 16 years old, and I had Danny and Eli and Marcus and Sam looking at me like I was supposed to know what to do, and you were here, but you weren't here. Luke, don't. Luke's voice broke clean through on that word. Don't explain it. I know you were grieving. I know you were destroyed. I know all of that, but I was grieving too. I was grieving too, and nobody asked me how I was doing. Not once. Not you, not anyone, because I was the oldest one home, and so I was supposed to just handle it. Cole was on his feet, and Hannah had never seen him look the way he looked in that moment. Not old, not tired, not the stoic, weathered man she had come to understand, but something younger and raw and absolutely leveled. You're right, Cole said. Luke stopped. You're right, Cole said again, and his voice had a quality Hannah had never heard in it before, something broken open and completely undefended. I failed you. I failed all of you. I know that. I have known that every single day, and I didn't know how to fix it, and so I kept going the only way I knew how, and I left you carrying things a 16-year-old boy had no business carrying, and I am so sorry, Luke. I am so sorry. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Hannah had ever heard. Luke's face did something complicated and devastating, the face of a young man who has been braced against a door for years and has just felt the pressure on the other side release all at once and doesn't know yet how to stand upright without it. Hannah stepped back from the hallway. She went back to the kitchen. She didn't go back to the dishes. She just stood at the counter with her hands flat on the surface and listened to the silence from the office, and then the sounds that came after the silence, and she closed her eyes and let the relief of it move through her. She had not done that. Cole had. Luke had. Between them, with nothing but the truth and the willingness to finally say it. But she had stayed in this house long enough that it could happen. And sometimes she had learned sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to leave. When Cole came into the kitchen 20 minutes later, his eyes were red, and his face had the particular rawness of a man who has just laid down something very heavy, and he looked at Hannah at the counter, and she looked at him, and neither of them said a word about what had just happened in the office. Cole poured himself a glass of water. He drank it. He set it in the sink. Then he said quietly, "That dinner you made Wednesday, the brisket." Hannah said, "What about it?" "Sam said it was the best thing he'd ever eaten." Hannah said, "Sam says that every time he eats." Cole almost smiled. Not quite, close enough. "Yeah," he said. "He does." He went to bed. Hannah stood in the quiet kitchen for a long time after, and somewhere above her, the house breathed and settled, and she could hear the boys in their rooms. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening footsteps and water running and a door closing. And all of it together sounded like something she didn't quite dare name yet. She turned off the kitchen light. She went upstairs. And for the first time since she had arrived at the Walker Ranch, she fell asleep without lying awake, first planning the next day, calculating the next problem, measuring the distance still to go. She simply slept. She woke up the morning after Cole and Luke's confrontation to find that the house felt different. Not quieter, not louder. Just different in the way a room feels after someone has finally opened a window that has been painted shut for years. Same room, same walls, same furniture. But the air inside it has changed in a way you can't see, but can absolutely feel. Sam was already at the kitchen table when she came downstairs. That was not unusual. What was unusual was that Luke was sitting next to him, not across from him, not at the far end. Next to him close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and Luke was showing Sam something in a worn paperback book that Hannah recognized as belonging to the small shelf in the living room. Sam was leaning in with his full attention, asking questions in his rapid-fire way, and Luke was answering them, not with the clipped patience of an older brother performing obligation, but with genuine engagement, the way a person talks about something they actually care about. Hannah went to the stove without saying anything. She cracked eggs. She did not remark on it. Because the surest way to collapse a new and fragile thing was to shine too much light on it before it had any strength. Eli came in at 6:15 and stopped in the doorway when he saw Luke at the table, and the particular surprise on his face, brief, quickly masked, told Hannah that this was not a common sight. Eli sat down on Luke's other side without comment. Marcus appeared 2 minutes later and did the same thing on the opposite side of the table, pulling out the chair next to Sam with elaborate casualness, as though he sat this close to his brothers every morning, and it meant nothing. By the time Cole came downstairs, all 5 of the younger boys were at the table together. Cole stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at them. Hannah handed him a coffee cup. He took it. He sat down. Nobody said anything about it, which was the right call, and Hannah felt a quiet pride in these boys in their collective, unspoken understanding that some things were better held gently than examined, that she hadn't expected to feel so soon. Wade came in last, poured his own coffee, looked at the table full of his brothers and said, "What did I miss?" "Nothing," Danny said. "Sit down," Luke said. Wade sat down. Breakfast that morning was the closest thing to ordinary that the Walker kitchen had produced since Hannah arrived, and she stood at the stove and kept her back to them and let it happen around her, and the sounds of it, the overlapping voices, the mild arguments about nothing important. Sam's particular high-pitched laugh when Danny said something that struck him funny settled into her chest like something she wanted to keep. The hard part came 2 days later in a way she hadn't prepared for. She was in Clara's garden. Her garden now, though she never called it that. Always, the garden always careful with the language of ownership. in a house where ownership meant something complicated, when she heard the truck come up the road fast. Too fast. The kind of fast that meant something had gone wrong somewhere that couldn't wait. It was Wade. He came around the corner of the house, moving at a pace she'd never seen from him, and said, "Cole's at the bank." Hannah set down the trowel. "What happened?" "Driscoll called this morning," Wade said. Driscoll was the manager at the First Agricultural Bank of Mill Haven, the man whose patients Cole had been managing for the better part of a year. "He wants to meet today. Cole went in an hour ago." Hannah stood up. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Cole said not to worry you." She was already untying her garden apron. "That man," she said quietly, not as a criticism, but as a plain statement of fact about a person whose instinct was always to carry things alone, and Wade almost smiled at it because he recognized it too. "It's bad?" she asked. Wade's almost smile went away. "Driscoll's been patient because he's known our family 20 years, but patience got a limit, and we're at it." Hannah went inside, washed her hands, and got her account notebook from the office, the one she'd been keeping since her second week, every number organized and current, and she drove herself to the First Agricultural Bank of Mill Haven in the second truck, which she had quietly learned to drive in the first week without making an announcement about it. She walked into the bank and asked the woman at the front desk for Driscoll's office. The woman said he was in a meeting. Hannah said she was aware of that she was part of it. The woman looked uncertain. Hannah smiled pleasantly and waited. The woman picked up the phone. Cole was sitting across from a man in his late 50s with the careful, measured expression of someone whose job required him to deliver bad news regularly, and had taught him to do it without pleasure. That was Driscoll. And he looked up when Hannah walked in with something between surprise and professional recovery. Cole's face did something more complicated. A flash of something embarrassment, or something close to it, and then a careful settling. "Hannah," he said. Just her name. Not a question. "Mr. Driscoll," Hannah said, extending her hand to the banker. "I'm Hannah Whitaker. I manage the Walker Ranch accounts." She set the notebook on his desk. "I believe you and my husband have been discussing the equipment loan. I'd like to be part of that conversation." A beat of silence. Cole had not introduced her as his wife to anyone in Millhaven. They had not made any formal announcement. What they were to each other was still technically in the arrangement stage. She had arrived, she had stayed, he had not asked her to leave, and the understanding between them had been building in the particular wordless way that understanding built between two people who communicated primarily through action. She had called him her husband. She felt Cole go very still beside her. Driscoll looked at her account notebook, then at her, then at Cole. Cole said, "Mr. Driscoll, this is my wife." The words landed with a weight she felt in the back of her throat. Driscoll recovered his professional composure and gestured to the chair beside Cole. "Please," he said, "sit down." What happened in the next 45 minutes was the most intensive negotiation Hannah had conducted since a particularly contentious argument with a landlord in Abilene over a security deposit, and this was significantly higher stakes than a security deposit. She opened her notebook, and she laid out the Walker Ranch's financial situation with a precision and clarity that she could see was not what Driscoll had expected from this meeting. And she proposed a modified payment schedule backed by the projected income from the Henderson hay sale, the market pies, and a third revenue stream she had been developing quietly for 2 weeks, a bulk order for baked goods from a diner in the next town over, arranged through the silver-haired woman from the farmer's market whose name turned out to be June Aldridge, and who had, without Hannah knowing it, been actively recommending her pies to every business owner she knew. Driscoll listened. He asked questions. Hannah answered them. Cole sat beside her and did not speak for most of it, which she understood was not passivity. It was a man recognizing that the person beside him was handling something better than he could in that moment, and having the sense to let her. At the end, Driscoll leaned back in his chair and looked at the notebook and then at both of them. "Cole," he said, "I've been doing this for 31 years. Most people who come into my office in your situation." He tilted his head slightly. "Don't come in with a plan. They come in with apologies. He looked at Hannah. This is a plan. It's a working plan, Hannah said. Not a guarantee. I won't tell you it's a guarantee. No, Driscoll said. But it's more than I had this morning. He closed the notebook and slid it back across the desk to her. 3 months. You meet these numbers in 3 months, and we restructure the loan on terms that give you room to breathe. Miss one marker, and we go back to the original timeline. He looked at Cole. Fair. Cole said, fair. They shook hands. In the truck outside the bank, neither of them spoke for a full minute. Then Cole said, You called me your husband. I know, Hannah said. You didn't ask me first. No, she said. I didn't. Another silence. You could have told me you were coming, he said. Not angry, more like a man navigating unfamiliar territory without a map. You could have told me you had a meeting, she said. A beat. Fair, he said. He started the truck. They drove 2 blocks before he said without looking at her, Thank you. You're welcome, she said. They drove another block. Cole said, I think we should probably make it official. Hannah looked at the road ahead. The marriage. If you're willing, he said. I know this isn't. He stopped. Tried again. I'm not easy to live with. The boys aren't easy. The ranch isn't easy. I don't have a lot to offer that looks good on paper. Cole, Hannah said. Yeah. I already live there, she said. And I haven't left. He was quiet, then roughly, No, you haven't. That's my answer, she said. He nodded once the way he nodded when something was decided, and he didn't need more words for it. And Hannah looked back at the road and let the simplicity of the moment be exactly what it was. They were married the following Saturday at the county courthouse. No ceremony, no guests. 2 witnesses pulled from the clerk's office. Hannah wore a blue dress she had brought in one of the 2 suitcases from Abilene. Cole wore the same jacket he wore to the feed store. It took 11 minutes, including the paperwork. When they got back to the ranch, Danny was the first one out the door, and he took one look at their faces and yelled back into the house, They did it! The response from inside was immediate and overlapping, and included at least one crash that turned out to be Marcus knocking a chair over in his rush to get to the door. Sam ran straight into Hannah's side and grabbed on with both arms, and she put her hand on his hair and held him there, and over his head, she looked at the porch where Luke was standing. He was not at the front of the group. He wasn't hanging back either. He was just there watching with his arms at his sides instead of crossed. And when Hannah looked at him, he held her gaze for a moment and then looked at his father and said, Congratulations! Cole said, Thank you, son. 2 words. They were enough. The supper celebration that Hannah had been quietly planning for 3 weeks came together on a Wednesday evening in the first week of August, which Hannah had chosen because the heat had broken slightly, and because the tomatoes in Clara's garden had reached the exact peak she had been waiting for, and because the boys had all without being asked managed to be home by 4 o'clock, which felt like a sign. She had been cooking since morning, brisket low and slow in the oven since 6 a.m., the smell of it moving through the whole house by mid-morning and producing a procession of boys through the kitchen at intervals, each one finding a pretext to be there, Sam needing water, Danny checking if anything needed taste testing, Eli looking for something he'd allegedly left on the counter. She put them all to work. Sam shucked corn at the kitchen table with the focused seriousness he brought to all assigned tasks. Marcus sliced tomatoes with more care than she'd expected from an 11-year-old, and arranged them on the platter in a pattern that was clearly deliberate. Danny made the cornbread without being asked, having apparently claimed it as his domain at some point in the past several weeks and executed it with the authority of someone who considered it settled. Wade and Caleb set up the long table outside, dragging it from the barn where Cole had found it in storage. Clara's supper table Hannah learned from Eli in a whisper, the one they used to use for summer evenings before everything changed. She had not known that. She stood at the kitchen window and watched Cole carry one end of that table across the yard with Wade at the other end, and she watched Cole set it down and run his hand along the top of it once briefly before he went back to work, and she turned away from the window and kept cooking because she didn't trust her face right then. Luke came into the kitchen at 3 o'clock. He stood in the middle of the room and looked around at the organized chaos of it. The pies cooling on the counter, the cornbread in the pan. Sam with his corn silk everywhere, the smell of brisket so strong it was almost a physical presence, and he said, "What do you need?" Hannah looked at him. "The garden," she said. "There's a basket on the back porch. I need the last of the green beans and whatever's ripe on the pepper plants. You'll know when you see them." Luke nodded. He took the basket and went. He came back 15 minutes later with the basket full, and he set it on the counter beside Hannah, and he looked at the row of pies, and the pan of cornbread, and the big pot on the back of the stove, and he said quietly, without quite looking at her, "This is a lot of work." "It's not so bad," Hannah said. "She used to do this," Luke said. "Mom, the big suppers." He stopped. "Not as often as we wanted, but when she did." He stopped again. His jaw was working. Hannah kept her hands moving. She didn't look at him directly. "What was her best dish?" she asked. A pause. "Peach cobbler," Luke said. "She made this peach cobbler that nobody could figure out what she put in it. She wouldn't tell anyone." Hannah was quiet for a moment. "I have a pretty good peach cobbler," she said. Luke looked at her. "It's not the same," she said immediately. "It won't be the same. I know that." "No," Luke said, slowly. "But it's pretty good," she said. Something moved across Luke's face, something complicated and young and grieving, and underneath all of that, something that was working its way carefully toward something else. "Okay," he said. He pulled up a chair and sat at the kitchen table. He stayed there the rest of the afternoon. He didn't say much. He answered Sam's questions when Sam directed them at him. He ate the edge piece of cornbread that Danny offered him without ceremony. He watched Hannah work, and she let him watch, and nobody made anything of it. When the supper finally came together outside as the evening light went long and gold over the Walker Ranch, the table full. All 8 of them seated brisket and cornbread and green beans and tomatoes and cobbler, still warm from the oven. Cole sat at one end and Hannah sat at the other. And between them stretched 6 boys and 3 years of grief and 1 whole summer of small, stubborn, irreversible things. Cole looked down the length of the table. He started to say something, stopped. He tried again. "I'm not good at speeches," he said. "Nobody asked for a speech," Wade said. "I know, but..." He looked at Hannah. "I want to say in front of all of you that this woman showed up in this house when it was barely holding together, and she held it together. And she didn't have to. And I want you to know that I know that." He looked at his sons one to the next. "And I want you to remember this. Tonight. This table. Because this is what we're going to be from here on." Silence. Then Sam said, "Can we eat now?" The table broke into laughter. Real laughter, unguarded, the kind that hadn't come from this family in a long time. And Hannah felt it land somewhere deep and permanent. And she looked at the faces around her, and let herself for the first time since stepping off that bus, with 2 suitcases and a lifetime of disappointments, feel something that she recognized even now, even careful as she was, as something very close to home. The laughter from that supper table did not disappear with the evening. It stayed in the house the way good things sometimes stay. Not loud, not obvious, but present in the way the air in a room is present, felt rather than seen. Hannah noticed it in the mornings first. The boys came downstairs differently. Not dramatically differently, not in any way she could point to and name, but the quality of their arrival in the kitchen had shifted from the careful, self-contained movement of people sharing a space to something that looked more like people coming home to a place they had some claim on. Sam started talking at breakfast. Not the careful, minimal responses he had offered in the first weeks, testing each word before he released it, but actual talking about dreams he'd had, about things Danny had said, about a book Luke had given him to read about, whether Hannah thought a dog would be a reasonable thing to ask for at Christmas. Hannah answered every question with full attention and never once indicated that the volume of them was anything other than welcome, because it wasn't. Sam's voice in the morning was one of the best sounds the Walker kitchen had ever produced, and she knew it, even if she never said so. Luke was the one she watched most carefully in the weeks after the supper. Not because she was worried, because she was paying attention to something she had worked a long time toward, and wanted to see clearly now that it was actually happening. He was different in ways that were small, and therefore significant. He stopped positioning himself at the edges of rooms. He stopped engineering his exits from conversations before they could go anywhere real. One evening, she came into the living room and found him and Cole sitting together, watching a baseball game on the television. Just sitting, just watching close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. And she turned around and went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter and let the relief of it move through her until she could breathe normally again. It was the third week of August when Caleb told Cole he'd called about the Houston job. Hannah was in the office when she heard it, the door open, not deliberately listening, but unable not to. "The offer's still there," Caleb said. "They held it. I don't know why, but they held it." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Houston?" "It's good money, Dad. Real good money. Management track." "I know what it is." Another silence. Then Cole said, "You want to go?" "I want—" Caleb stopped. "I want to know if you need me here." "I always need you here," Cole said. "That's not the question. The question's whether me needing you here is reason enough for you to stay." Hannah pressed her back against the wall in the hallway and did not breathe. Caleb said, "Hannah said something like that to me, a couple months ago." "Did she?" "Yeah." A pause. "She said there's a difference between choosing to be somewhere and staying, because you feel like you can't leave." Cole was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She's right." "I know she's right," Caleb said. "That's why I'm asking you instead of just going." Another long silence. "Go," Cole said. His voice was rough but steady. "Go and do something good. Come home when you can. That's all I'm asking." Hannah heard Caleb's exhale from 20 feet away. "Yeah," Caleb said. "Okay." She pushed off the wall and went back to the kitchen before either of them could find her in the hallway, and she stood at the sink with the water running over her hands and felt the particular ache of something that was both a loss and exactly right at the same time. Caleb left for Houston on a Saturday in early September. All 7 of them stood in the yard to watch him go, which nobody had planned. And nobody suggested. It simply happened the way the right things sometimes happen when a family has found its rhythm. One person coming out, and then another, until all of them were there in the morning light, watching Caleb load the last bag into his truck. He went down the line of them the way you do when you're leaving a place you love and want to remember how each person looks before the distance changes things. He shook Wade's hand and pulled him in. He scrubbed Danny's hair, which Danny loudly objected to. He crouched down to Sam's level and said something private that made Sam nod with great seriousness and then throw both arms around Caleb's neck. He stopped in front of Hannah last. He was 23 years old and broad-shouldered and had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes. And he looked at Hannah for a moment with an expression that held more than he had words for. "You fixed it," he said. "No," Hannah said. "I just stayed." Caleb shook his head slightly. "You don't give yourself enough credit." "And you don't give your family enough," she said. "They did the hard part, every one of them." He looked at her for another moment. Then he hugged her, not the careful, tentative embrace of a young man uncertain of his welcome, but a real one, the kind that meant something. She hugged him back. He got in his truck and drove down the ranch road, and they all stood there until the dust settled. And then Sam slipped his hand into Hannah's, and she held it, and nobody said anything for a minute, because there was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said. Cole put his hand on her shoulder. She reached up and covered it with hers. The 3-month deadline Driscoll had set arrived on a Tuesday. Hannah drove herself to the bank alone. Cole had offered to come, and she had told him to stay on the ranch because the Henderson's second payment was due to clear that day, and someone needed to be there to confirm it. That was true. It was also true that she wanted to walk into that office herself and lay the numbers down herself and let them speak for themselves without anyone beside her, not because she needed to prove something to Driscoll, but because she needed to prove something to herself, and she understood the difference. Driscoll reviewed her numbers for 11 minutes. She counted. He closed the folder. He looked at her. "Mrs. Walker," he said, "you hit every marker." "I know," she said. "Not just hit," he said. "You exceeded the hay projection by 12%, and the supplemental income stream is running 40% above what you showed me in June." "June Aldridge's referrals," Hannah said. "I'd been conservative in my projection because I didn't know yet how reliable her network was. Turns out it's very reliable." Driscoll almost smiled. "Turns out," he said. He opened the folder again and pulled out a single page. "New terms. Extended repayment period, reduced monthly obligation. Gives you room to build a reserve before the next cattle cycle." He slid it across the desk. "If you're agreeable." Hannah read every line. She signed it. She drove back to the Walker Ranch with the signed copy on the passenger seat and the windows down because the September air had finally dropped to something that felt like breathing, and she thought about the woman who had sat on a bus 4 months ago, convinced she was being practical and not quite willing to examine whether she was also being brave. She had been both. She understood that now. Cole was on the porch when she pulled up. He had been watching for her, she could tell, in the way he was positioned, not seated, not working just there, which was its own kind of waiting. She got out of the truck. She held up the folder. He came down the porch steps in 2 strides. He took the folder, looked at the top page, looked at her. Then he did something she had never seen Cole Walker do. He laughed. A real one. Not the careful half-smile she had catalogued over 4 months, not the quiet satisfaction of a man who had won a point, but a full, unguarded, relieved laugh that changed his whole face, and Hannah looked at that face and thought, there he is. There is the man who was in there the whole time. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she said. He pulled her in and held her right there in the yard in the afternoon light, and she let him. And they stood like that for longer than either of them would probably admit to later. And over his shoulder, she could see the ranch, the garden, the patched fence, the barn, the house with its long porch, where 6 boys had stood in a line that first evening watching her like she was something they hadn't decided about yet. She had decided about them. That was what they hadn't understood. She had decided the moment she read the line about Sam and the flashlight. She had decided on that bus with her hand against the window. And she had kept deciding every morning before 5, every difficult dinner, every account book and market pie and storm-soaked night in the north pasture. She had never stopped deciding. The twist came from a direction none of them had seen. It came from Luke. In the 2nd week of September, Luke asked Hannah to sit down with him at the kitchen table after dinner. Just her, not Cole, which she understood was intentional. He had a piece of paper in front of him folded, and he put it on the table and didn't open it yet. "I got something in the mail," he said. Hannah waited. "There's an agricultural management program," he said, "at Texas A&M, 2 years. You come out with a certification and a business track that's specifically for ranch operations." He paused. "I applied in July. I didn't tell anyone." Hannah looked at the folded paper. "I got in," Luke said. The kitchen was very quiet. "Luke," Hannah said, "I know what you're going to say." "Do you?" "You're going to say I should go," he said. "Same thing you said to Caleb." "Is that what I'm going to say?" He looked at her. "Isn't it?" Hannah was quiet for a moment. She looked at the folded acceptance letter on the table between them, and she thought about a 16-year-old boy who had held a family together with both hands for 3 years, while his father grieved and his brothers watched him for signals about whether it was safe to fall apart. She thought about the list of suppliers he had left on the kitchen table in the 2nd week, anonymous without acknowledgement. She thought about the north pasture and the heifer in the drainage ditch, and his voice saying, "So did you," in the gray dawn. "Luke," she said, "what do you want?" He looked surprised by the question, like it was one he had been so busy not asking himself that hearing it from the outside landed wrong. "I want—" He stopped. "I want to come back here," he said. "I want to come back and run this ranch right. The way it should be run. Better than it's been. He looked at the letter. But this program, it would give me the tools to actually do that. Not just work harder. Work smarter. Then go, Hannah said. Dad needs... Your dad has Wade, Hannah said. And he has me. And he has Danny, who is 14 and already better at fence work than men twice his age. And he has Marcus and Eli and Sam, who are growing up faster than any of us can track. She leaned forward slightly. The best thing you can do for this ranch is come back to it in 2 years knowing things none of us know now. That is not abandoning it. That is investing in it. Luke stared at the table. He's going to say I am leaving, Luke said. And underneath the words was everything. The 3 years, the flashlight burning nights, the weight of being the oldest one home, the fear that leaving meant repeating what he had accused his father of. He's going to be proud of you, Hannah said. And if he doesn't say it the right way on the first try, I will make sure he says it again until he gets it right. Something cracked open in Luke's face, not apart, not breaking, but open, the way a door opens when someone finally turns the right key. You'd do that, he said. Not a question. I've been doing it since June, Hannah said. Luke looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the letter, unfolded it, and smoothed it flat on the table between them. And she could see the Texas A&M seal at the top, and the formal language of an acceptance, and her name would never be on it. And she was so proud she could barely hold her face still. Okay, Luke said. He told Cole that evening. Hannah stayed in the kitchen. She heard the conversation from there. Not every word, but enough. And what she heard was Cole's initial silence, which she had predicted. And then Luke's voice lower and steadier than she expected, laying it out clearly. And then Cole saying something she couldn't make out. And then a longer silence. And then what sounded like a chair scraping back and movement, and more silence of a different quality entirely. When Cole came into the kitchen 20 minutes later, his eyes were red again at the edges. He said, "Did you know?" "He told me tonight," Hannah said. "You talked him into it." "I didn't talk him into anything," she said. "He already wanted it. I just told him he was allowed to." Cole leaned against the counter and looked at her with the expression she had come to understand was his closest approach to undone the expression he wore when something had moved him past the place where his usual containment could hold. "I don't know how you do it," he said. "I listen," Hannah said. "That's all? I just listen." Cole shook his head slowly. "It's not all," he said. She turned back to the counter. "Go sit with him," she said. "He needs his father tonight, not me." Cole went. Luke left for College Station on a Sunday in late September. The send-off was louder than Caleb's. Danny had appointed himself the official event organizer, which meant there was homemade cornbread involved and a badly wrapped package from the younger boys that turned out to be a new work journal, and 3 pens presented with enormous pride by Sam, who had been personally responsible for the wrapping and was aware it was imperfect. Luke stood with the package in his hands and looked at his brothers and did not trust his voice enough to say much. Then he looked at Hannah. "The garden," he said. "The west bed's going to need replanting before first frost. The soil's getting compacted on the right side." Hannah said, "I know. There's a good amendment mix at the co-op in..." "Luke," she said. He stopped. "I know," she said again. He nodded. He got in his truck. He drove away. Sam stood next to Hannah and watched the truck disappear and then said in his precise and serious way, "He's coming back, though." "Yes," Hannah said. "Not like Mom," Sam said. The words were so direct and so quiet that Hannah felt them like a hand pressed flat against her chest. She crouched down to Sam's level. She looked at him straight. "Not like your mom," she said. "Your mom didn't choose to leave. Luke is choosing to go and choosing to come back. That's completely different. Do you understand that?" Sam thought about it with the focused seriousness he brought to important things. "Yeah," he said. "Okay," Hannah said. She stood back up. Sam slipped his hand into hers. She held it. The Walker Ranch moved into autumn, the way things move when they have found their right direction. Not easily, not without difficulty, but with the particular momentum of something that has been properly set in motion. The loan restructure gave them room to plan for the spring cattle cycle with real numbers instead of hope. The market pies had become a Millhaven fixture, and June Aldridge had introduced Hannah to 3 other women who ran small operations like hers, and between them they had begun something informal and useful that nobody had named yet, but that met monthly at someone's kitchen table and was, Hannah thought, the closest thing she had had to her own community in a very long time. Danny turned 15 in October and asked for a proper role on the ranch. Not chores a role, and Cole gave it to him with the appropriate gravity, and Danny took it with the appropriate seriousness, and Hannah watched it happen from the kitchen window and felt the kind of satisfaction that has no adequate name. Marcus had started leaving his drawings on the kitchen table again, but now he stayed when Hannah wrote her notes beside them, watching her face while she read. And one morning she wrote this, "One should be framed," and Marcus looked at it for a long time and then said, "Really?" And Hannah said, "Really?" And he took the drawing upstairs, and 2 weeks later she noticed it was hanging on the wall in the hallway, in a simple frame that she was almost certain Luke had sent money for, though nobody confirmed it. Cole in those autumn months became someone she had not quite seen coming, not different from who he was. More fully himself, the careful, principled, quietly devoted man who had been there all along, but buried under 3 years of grief and the crushing weight of trying to hold everything alone. He talked more. Not excessively, not in a way that was unlike him, but enough. He told her things about the ranch's history, about his own father, about the years before Clara got sick. He told her what he had been afraid of when he placed the advertisement, and what he had been afraid of when she actually showed up, and she told him what she had been afraid of on the bus, and they sat at the kitchen table after the boys were in bed, and talked in the way that 2 people talk when they have decided they are safe with each other, and it was the best part of Hannah's days. On a Tuesday evening in November, 3 weeks after Luke called from College Station to report that he was passing everything, and had made 2 friends, and had found to his apparent bewilderment that he was genuinely enjoying himself on that Tuesday evening, a neighbor came by the ranch. His name was Roy Hennessy, and he ran the property adjoining the Walkers' east fence, and he was the kind of man who delivered observations about other people's business in the tone of a compliment, while meaning something else entirely. He stood on the porch and talked to Cole about the fall season and the cattle market, and then said with the smile of a man who thinks he is being gracious, "You got lucky, Cole. Woman like that showing up when she did." Cole said, "She didn't show up. She answered a letter I wrote, and she made a decision, and she drove herself here on a bus, and she worked harder than anyone on this property. That's not luck." Hennessy blinked. Cole said, "Evening, Roy," and went inside. Hannah was at the kitchen counter and had heard every word through the screen door. She did not say anything when Cole came in. Cole poured himself a glass of water. He looked at her. She looked at him. "What?" he said. "Nothing," Hannah said. She went back to what she was doing, but she was smiling, and he could see it, and he stood there a moment longer than he needed to before he went back to his chair. And that all of it. The whole ordinary, beautiful, ordinary moment was the thing she had come 400 miles on a bus for, though she hadn't known it then. She knew it now. The Walker Ranch did not become a perfect place. It remained a working ranch with a working ranch's difficulties. The debt slow in its retreat. The weather unpredictable. The cattle market indifferent to anyone's plans. The boys loud and occasionally maddening in the particular way of boys who are becoming men, and haven't entirely decided which one they are yet. There were hard months and tired months and months when Hannah lay awake doing math that didn't work out and had to find another way. But the ranch was alive, and the family inside it was alive. In a way it hadn't been for 3 years, talking, arguing, laughing, leaving and coming back, sitting at Clara's table under the summer strings of lights, and in the close warmth of the kitchen in winter, and every configuration in between held together not by blood alone, but by something that blood alone had never been enough to build. Hannah Walker. She had taken his name without discussion, and Cole had not asked her about it, and neither had the boys, because it was simply understood. Stood in her kitchen on a December evening and listened to the sounds of the house around her. And they were the sounds of 7 people living fully inside the same walls. And there was nothing in her life she had come to before this that had ever sounded like that. Luke called on a Sunday to say his first semester grades were the best of his academic life. Caleb called on a Thursday to say he had gotten his first promotion. Sam asked on a Wednesday if he could get a dog, and Hannah said she would think about it, which Sam correctly interpreted as yes. Cole sat across from her at the kitchen table on a Friday night with the account books open between them and said, "We're going to be all right." And it was the first time he had said it without the particular caution of a man afraid to believe his own words. Hannah looked at him. "Yes," she said, "we are." And that was the truth. Plain hard-won and permanent of a woman who had shown up at the end of a long road with 2 suitcases and no guarantee, and had refused every single day in every small and unspectacular way available to her to stop showing up. Not because it was easy, not because she was certain, but because love, real love, the kind that holds and feeds and listens and stays, is not a feeling you wait to have. It is a decision you make every morning before the sun comes up. And Hannah Walker made it every day.